Hey guys, so today I was just going to go through sort of my top few albums that I've listened to over the years that have really influenced my playing, influenced sort of the way that I record, or even the way that I arrange music or compose music. So the first one is Rush Moving Pictures. I've always been a huge Rush fan. It was sort of inevitable that I was going to be. I mean, from my mum and dad, who are both massive Rush fans, and they took me to see them back in 2010 on their Time Machine tour, where they played the entirety of Moving Pictures back to back, and that was my first sort of proper concert that I'd been to, and it just blew my mind. At that point, hadn't been hugely familiar with the band. I knew a few songs from car rides that my mum would put on, like 2112 and Tom Sawyer, but other than that, I didn't really know them that much. And that concert was the first sort of exposure to a live band, yes, but also to watching Neil Peart playing drums. And I was just absolutely just blown away by what he was doing, just the live element of it. His parts are just so immaculate and complex, but at the same time they're just so well arranged and composed. It's almost like an orchestral composition just in the drums. You know, just the way that he does things, it's just absolutely amazing. So that album was really the first time that I sat down and decided to try and learn something. So just to pick an instrument and to just go all out and try and learn this part. So with like the drums, learning each fill, each rhythm that Neil Peart played on Moving Pictures, just from every single song. That was the first time that I sat down and learnt a whole album, just challenged myself to just learn an album on the drums. So the second album is a bit of a change from the last one, is Nirvana in Utero. Now this one I'd always been a huge fan of, mainly for its raw power and its sort of nakedness, and there's just, from everything to the guitars to the drums, even the vocals are just so rawly recorded. There's no sort of added processing to them to change the sound. It's just what you got was what you were given. It's sort of like a punk album. I just loved the production on that, from Steve Albini, who's one of my favourite producers. Changed my outlook on recording more than anything. So the third album is Dream Theater's Images and Words. This was my first sort of exposure to Dream Theater, another very progressive metal band. It was my first exposure to sort of like a conceptual band, and the idea of making a conceptual album, along with a heavy influence from Mike Portnoy, who took a lot from drummers like Neil Peart and took it to that next extreme. So you could really hear this coming across on this album. His own sort of spin on signature fills, the tripleting fill, which I tend to abuse a fair bit. They're sort of almost not even meaning to, but it's just so much fun to do. So the last album of mine is Periphery Alpha Omega. This was my first introduction to the band Periphery. It quickly became one of my favourite bands. This album in particular really did open my eyes to the whole sort of like gent movement. The idea of very syncopated rhythms, particularly on the drums and the bass, and then the extreme chugginess of the guitars. What Matt Halpern did on this album, drum-wise, is just absolutely fantastic. It's an absolute nerd fest for every instrument. The drums, the guitars, the bass, even the vocals, everything on those albums is just absolutely stellar. Particularly songs like The Bad Thing, where it just absolutely destroys from beat one. You know you're going to get an absolute face full of metal, and it's just beautiful. I love things like that. And of course, the production is just absolutely next level, which is a thing that Periphery always seem to manage to do, is when you think sonically you can't do anything else here, they find a way to top that on the next album. You know, they're a band that just keep pushing on their instruments, production wise, mixing wise, and therefore they're just a huge inspiration to me on all those fronts, on playing, on production, on mixing, just on everything. They're just incredible. One of my favorite bands, and those albums, Alpha Omega, incredible.